I'd like to call the meeting of the Development Review Board order, October 21st, 2014. Okay, Dan?
Okay, we have two sets of minutes this evening to review. The first is from September 16th. So if the board feels comfortable with those minutes, I'd ask for a motion.
Will we approve?
Second. All in favor?
Okay. And then we also have the minutes from October 7th. Just before you do vote on that, I did receive a request from some folks to add some information to the minutes, which is certainly fine. So we'll make sure that that happens, just so you folks know. And that will be addended to these minutes, these current minutes that will be taken today as an addendum, reflecting that your comments regarding the previous minutes.
Sure.
Let me turn up the mic. Okay, so the next minutes are from October 7th, 2014.
Question on that. Should there be a note that Milt recused himself from that hearing?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it in there? I didn't notice it.
Double check.
Okay, thanks.
I have a motion to? So moved. Bill moves, Charles seconds. All in favor?
Okay. Next item on their agenda is the witness oath, and we do have over on that brown table over there the oath statement, which is a sign-up sheet, and it includes the following oath statement. And we ask that anyone who speaks this evening to sign that, please. And again, it includes the following oath statement. I solemnly swear or affirm, under the pains and penalty of perjury, that the statements I make, testimony I give, and other evidence I submit to the board at the board's public hearing held on this date shall be true and correct to the best of my knowledge and belief. And again, that sign-up sheet is right over there on that brown table. Next item this evening is disclosure of any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest regarding the matters before the board this evening.
Do you have any?
No. Thank you. Our first agenda item this evening is Southern Vermont College at 987 Monument Avenue. The applicant is seeking approval for some new signs at their new Welcome Center property. If you folks will recall, when that application was approved several weeks ago, now months ago, the board had asked that the applicant return to the board with any new signage that they proposed for the property. So they have submitted their plans for new signs, and there are folks here from SVC this evening who will be presenting that information.
Thank you to the board and the chairman of the board and Mr. Monks.
You state your name, please.
My name is Lawrence Frank,
Okay.
Bennett Frank McCarthy Architects, and I'm working for the owners of the gatehouse and with the college on the project. There are 4 signs that we're proposing to add to the building. 2 of them are identity signs and 2 of them are wayfinding signs. And I'm going to just describe them briefly for you. The first sign labeled in your drawings is sign A, which is an identity sign, which is 4 feet by 4 feet, 16 square feet. It will be mounted on the pylon to the right of the gate to the entrance to the property. It's a metal sign. It'll have raised metal letters, and we plan to illuminate it with a downlight of some kind. We're going to look for an LED fixture, and we'll review that with Dan before we put it up. The second sign is labeled sign B, and it's a wayfinding sign, and we intend to mount that on the back of the gatehouse to help those who park at the back of the building find the entrance, which is on the south side of the building, as opposed to the door to the workroom, which is on the west side of the building. That sign is 24 inches by 30 inches, and we'll mount that sign on the building. The third sign is an additional wayfinding sign, and we intend to mount that in the yard to the east of the building so that it can be visible to drivers on Monument Avenue, and to direct them either into the Welcome Center, the Office of Admissions, or past the Welcome Center and beyond to Mansion Avenue, or to Redwood Drive and then to Mansion Avenue. The fourth sign, labeled Sign D, is a post-mounted, again, a monument sign, which we plan to put on the Redwood Drive facing of the property, frontage of the property, and it is it's 4 foot by 4 foot, and it is 16 square feet, and it's a metal sign. And that's the brief description. I'd be glad to answer any questions. And I have Jeremy Gibbons from SVC is with me here tonight if there are any other questions. And he's the Director of Admissions, Assistant Dean of Admissions for Southern Vermont College.
Any questions? Ron?
And just one, all these signs are on Southern Vermont College's property, is that correct?
That's correct.
They're all on their own property, okay,
All
thank
on
you.
property.
Dan?
Will you be removing any existing signs?
I guess there is a
few
sign at
small
the
ones.
corner of Redwood and Monument which would be replaced by these signs.
Charlie?
You said that the one on the building by the gates is going to be lighted. Are the others going to be lighted too?
At present time, we're not intending to light the other signs.
I have a question. I asked you about, that A sign. You don't show the lighting on your drawing. Would you just indicate that when you give the drawings to Dan?
I will, when I revise the sign, there's an error on the drawing labeled SP1A where we initially had planned to mount sign A on the wall closer to the house. And so I'm going to correct that to show the correct location on the pier, and at that time I'll add the lighting to the drawing as well.
Any other questions from the board? Anyone in the audience want to speak? Okay, we need a motion to
Motion to approve.
approve. Dan moves to approve. Charles seconds. All in favor? You're all set.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is Diamond Printing at 933 Main Street. These folks have requested a continuance, so if the board is satisfied with that request, would ask for a motion to continue that to the next meeting, which will be the November 18th meeting. We will not be meeting on Election Day.
So moved.
So Ron moves. Charles seconds. All in favor? Okay.
Okay.
Moving right along.
Next and final hearing is Shires Housing Apple Ridge Development LLC at 426 South Street in Eden Way. This is the second hearing for this application. We're going to follow the same sort of format we did last time, where we'll allow the applicant to make a brief presentation. We assume that they'll be addressing the questions that were submitted to them, and then we'll move on to the citizens group, then to any abutters, and then to anyone else who would like to speak to this application this evening.
Good evening.
Perhaps you know that John is unable to make it tonight. He's at a conference in Nashville, a housing conference. I brought a few annual reports of housing amounts in case anyone's interested in looking at them.
Excuse the delay.
Blasting once he show rocks.
No. We can do this. It should just be cat at this point. We should just cat.
Okay.
Good evening. Jason Dolmich with MSK Engineering. Be presenting the final presentation for the Shires Housing and Housing Vermont proposal for Mountain View Apartments located on Eden Way in Bennington. We have submitted follow-up information, which includes the geotechnical report and responses to the questions from the citizens group. I am happy to address any additional questions that you may have, but I won't go beyond what was written in those. I won't restate anything within those. We did also submit a site plan, so I'll just quickly review what the changes to the site plan were from the previous presentation. We've indicated snow storage areas that are proposed on site around the parking facility near building A and B. We have also proposed additional stockade fence along the northern boundary line, which will be abut Fellows, Mason, and Pensco Trust. In that same northern boundary, we're proposing an extension of the coniferous trees, the 10 to 12 foot high evergreen trees along that boundary as shown on the plan. There was a request at the meeting as well to close the fence on the southern portion near the Silver Street side, and we've included that as well. Then in addition to that, I just want to further clarify some blasting requirements if blasting is required. You have the geotechnical report. The majority of the blasting for this parcel was completed in a prior iteration of the design. You can see from the report that that we had ledge at depth of 5 feet or less in sort of the northern northeastern corner, or northwestern corner, my apologies, of the parcel around Building B, which may require some removal of rock. However, that removal would be for either for trenching, for stormwater, or for the construction of foundations which are at grade. So we're not going to a full depth foundation. We really just need to get the foundation down to 5.5 feet so that there's no differential settlement in the building. If ledge is removed, it's not completely certain that we will be using blasting, but if blasting is required, the Vermont 2012 Fire and Building Safety Code adopts NFPA 1, which in its section 65.9.1 requires compliance with NFPA 495, which covers the transport, handling, and use of explosives. And NFPA 495 sets minimum monitoring requirements and vibratory limits based on the distance to adjacent structures and their construction type to the blasting area. So I also verified with the town building code official, enforcement division, that blasting operations are covered under the building permit, the town of Bennington building permit, because they have adopted and enforce the Vermont 2012 Fire and Building Safety Codes, which per NFPA 1 under 6.9.2.2 requires permits be filed to conduct blasting operations. So if blasting is completed, it will be a permitted and covered use under the building permit application itself. And in addition, if blasting is required, contractors will be obligated by the specifications to employ a company who specializes in blast surveys and who will conduct pre- and post surveys as well as monitoring during blasting. And those surveys will be required to include, at a minimum, examination by video, photographs, and measurements of interior and exterior buildings within a minimum of 500 feet from the blast site. And they will be required to monitor the blast in accordance with the NFPA 495. Blasting contractors will be obligated to carry liability insurance, and the results of surveys that shows damage to those structures will be entirely the responsibility. They will be entirely responsibility for rectifying those damages. And the general contractor will be overseeing that work, will be required to carry a bond as a part of the construction, and that any correction of damages will be a condition of the release of that bond. So after that, I'm happy to entertain any questions by the board or.
Do you have any questions on that? Jason, do you want to go down some of the questions that they asked you and just go through them quickly?
Would you like me to recite them or summarize them?
Yeah, because I'm not sure that everyone got an answer
Okay.
to the questions. We've pretty much done number one, so.
So the first question talked about damage to housing by blasting or hammering, and it's more a distillation of what I just stated. Number two, they asked for clarification of where the 3-unit building that we've proposed, the original permit that was granted and the subsequent amendment identified what we call the Hawks House, or the former structure, as a 3-unit building. I'm unsure of its current state right now, but because that was the original permit, we carried that through. So we are not proposing a 3-unit building for this project.
Can you actually read the questions and answer them so people at home know exactly what the question is and what the answers are?
Okay.
Just read the question.
Just read the question.
You want specific, you want the question to be asked and then answered in writing?
Read the question, then the answer.
Just read the question, then you can summarize your answer, yes, so we can all hear what's going on.
The item 3 was how much excavation will be required to build the proposed housing. And excavation will be required for all buildings to install the foundations, as well as underground trenching for water, sewer, electric hookup to buildings, stormwater, telephone, phone cable. A lot of that infrastructure is installed, but we'll be having to do additional because of the new structures. Excavation leveling for the duplex footprints has been complete, but there will be continued modification, obviously excavation for the foundations, stormwater, roadway, and so forth. Question number 4 was, will the ground need to be leveled? There has been initial site clearing. That's already taken place. The site is not going to be markedly changed, but there will be additional grading for all of the facilities, including buildings, roadways, sidewalks, and utilities for the site. And we discussed also the fact that right now there's a stormwater dry pond in the northeastern corner of the parcel. That is being proposed to be filled in with a permeable media that will serve as on-site stormwater storage for the facility and also increase the level of green space that we have behind both building A and B. Question number 5 asks, will someone trained in blasting and or hammering in a historic neighborhood be on hand if there is blasting and hammering? If blasting is required, as stated before, the contract document will be directing the site contractor to use blasting contractors with a minimum 5 years of experience in blasting in residential facilities. Blasting occurs in residential neighborhoods all over the state of Vermont, and those neighborhoods include historic structures. Will you measure radon levels in neighboring homes pre- and post-blasting or hammering? No, this is not required under life safety codes. How will the DRB or Shires Housing handle potential radon problems? Developers are fully aware that Bennington County, along with all the counties in the state except for Chittenden and Franklin, is in Zone 2 as determined by the EPA. Zone 2 counties have a predicted average indoor radon screening level between 2 and 4 PCI over L. By contrast, Zone 1 is greater than 4, and Zone 3 is less than 2. Because none of our proposed buildings will have crawl spaces or spaces of basements, no ventilations required under applicable building code. However, as precautionary measure, we will be installing a PVC pipe drop through the slab that can be fitted with ventilation if post-construction testing reveals elevated radon levels. If changes in radon levels increases to an unacceptable level as a result of hammering and/or blasting, is Shires Housing willing to install a certified radon mitigation system? The response is it can be demonstrated that the excavation, if it can be demonstrated that the excavation of foundations in the project site alone directly leads to increase in radon to unsafe levels in the neighboring homes within the radius of the blasting survey, Shires Housing and Housing Vermont agree to work in good faith with these owners to assist them in installing any required ventilation. What trees that are on site remain? There are scrub trees within the undeveloped portion of the property, which would be the A and B building here in the stormwater. Those are going to be removed as a part of construction. Trees within the vicinity of the property line that were ordered to be preserved as a part of the original Act 250 permit and the amended permit will continue to be preserved, and we propose to plant additional landscaping the site above required town minimum standards. Question 11, how mature will new trees be when planted? Will they be shade trees or merely ornamental? New trees will be, by town standards, a minimum of 2.5-inch caliper. They will be a shade tree per town regulations and depicted on the landscaping plan or the C2 site plan. And they'll be, we've also, all of the shade trees will be preliminarily or primarily deciduous shade trees, with the exception of the addition of the evergreen screening, which will all be proposed to be 10 to 12 feet high. So a fairly mature evergreen screen. The parking lot has minimum limited space where will snow be plowed in the winter. We've identified areas where plowing can include snow storage. What criteria will be used to determine that more cars will not result in more traffic? What criteria were used to determine that more cars would not result in more traffic? We are not proposing that more cars will not result in more traffic. Our traffic evaluation by Creighton Manning used acceptable practice of estimated expected peak period vehicles trips based on Institute of Transportation's trip generation, 9th edition. For the new 24 units, the additional vehicle trips are estimated, again, at 15 in the morning rush hour, that's peak hour, and 18 during evening rush hour. And so that the manual also calculated the expected aggregate, including all 24 during peak AM and PM hours, to be 24 and 31. According to accepted traffic and planning standards, this total volume of 21 is considered to be low for peak hours and well below the 100 trip threshold for peak hour that any trip, single approach to ITE is determined as potentially resulting in impacts. The evaluation then goes on to state, furthermore, the completion of the development as proposed will result in a comparable, if not slightly less trip generation than what was approved in 2006. Number 14, has Shires Housing received an easement from Apple Ridge Condominium Associates for traffic to travel on Eden Way to exit the development to South Street? An easement granting all necessary rights of ways for vehicular, pedestrian access, utilities, and service will be granted at the time of the subdivision and sale of the property. This easement cannot technically be granted until the property has been legally subdivided and conveyed to a separate entity. When the condo association is turned over to the owners in 16 months, on January 1, 2016, can the owners deny access to South Street? No, the easement granted will run the land regardless of any future ownership. What are your solutions, including cost estimates, to mitigate traffic and safety issues that might arise from the proposed development? We have proposed a crosswalk across Silver Street to provide pedestrian access to the new sidewalks on the east side of Silver Street. That's going to combine pedestrian access. It will be covered by the project. Site distances on both South Street and Silver Street they meet minimum intersection site stopping distances for the required speed limits. Those have already been approved as curb cuts to the town and are not expanding the use of the original curb cut. But we have in fact verified that they are safe to cross by state standards, and that we then there again do not expect that traffic safety or volume will be measurably impacted in any way by the development, and that we propose no additional measures aside from the measures that we've outlined already. Silver Street is a low volume minor street in Bennington, and it will continue to be so after the construction is complete and the units are occupied. Number 17, how will you remedy additional vehicle and pedestrian traffic should it become more problematic than anticipated and unsafe for local residents? Vehicular and pedestrian, as our response, or vehicular and pedestrian circulation has been well thought out, taking into account safety of residents, and that Shires will be the property manager and have the ability to manage vehicles and pedestrians via signage, fences, bollards, and striping upon occupancy, this of course being within the site. Well, with number 18, with the recent issue of adding pre-kindergarten students to our already overcrowded elementary school, what is the plan for housing additional pre-K students? We received the ability to serve letter on 7/23/2014. That was issued by the Southwestern Vermont Supervisor Union that states that that additional students expected by this proposed development can be absorbed by the school district with little measurable impact. Number 19 is, will the existing fence be extended and maintained? And yes, we've proposed that within the revised site plan, that it depicts the existing and new fences. And we, Shires and Housing Vermont, will commit to maintaining the existing and new fences that will be placed on the property. Number 20 is, will lighting be such that it does not impact neighbors? And yes, as we submitted in the lighting plan, with the applicable cut sheets and proposed exterior lighting, that it will be shielded, down-facing, dark sky, and they will not extend on a neighboring property. And number 21, how do you plan on addressing the issue of lack of green space? And although there's an open grassy area in the back of building A and B, roughly 90 by 120 feet, plus a 40 by 40 east of building A, each unit has an expressed and purposely dedicated usable private outdoor space for each apartment. And that that Housing Vermont and Shires has found that semi-private nooks, outdoor spaces, are desired and used by residents. They reflect the outdoor spaces that are typical in historic downtown neighborhoods, such as front porches and side patio spaces. And that multiple family dwellings, we are proposing usable semi-private outdoor patio space and balconies, and that these types of outdoor space are intentionally designed to respond to the small unit size, mostly 1 and 2 bedroom apartments that expect small family sizes of 1 to 3 persons.
Any questions from the board on these? Anyone from the audience like to ask questions?
We'll start with the citizens group. Yeah.
Give the citizens group. Jeannie?
And I'll remember to do that this time. We'd like to start by asking the board to do a site visit of the proposed project. If you look at the plans, it looks very spacious, but I don't know if you guys have been up there at all to look through it, to actually try to put your head around what is going to be in there. So I know it has to be a warned meeting or warned for a site visit. I don't know what to do besides throw it to you guys.
We can consider that at the end of the hearing. If you folks would like to do that, we can have, if there's a motion and a second and a majority, then we can schedule a site visit if that's something you folks want to do.
Okay.
Okay, and then what we would like to do is, we still have questions and would like some clarifications about the answers that they gave. So Mary would re-ask the question and just have people come up and give their little thing. We do have questions again at the end that we'll hand you. We prefer not to have them answer the questions during the time, just to kind of make it go faster and give them time to come up with answers.
Okay.
Okay, are we good then?
Thank you. The first question, if there is damage done to neighboring homes caused by blasting and/or hammering, which may be required to build the proposed Shires housing, what steps will be taken to resolve the problems?
Judith Ellis Miller. I have land that abuts the property. Shires answer shifts responsibility for possible damage to subcontractors. This is exactly the scenario outlined for previous construction projects in the neighborhood, and it really puts the onus on the property owner to try and find out what steps to take to address possible damage. It's just not specific enough. Nothing was said about people with experience working in neighborhoods that are historic in terms of either excavation or repair. We know for a fact, and this was referenced in my July 28th letter, that the Vermont Historic Preservation Society recommended that someone that is specifically trained in blasting around historic old structures be employed to do the blasting or oversee the blasting. And the question I have, are there local and state regulations covering blasting and/or hammering in neighborhoods with historic structures?
Fronia Simpson. I was happy to hear some of Mr. Dolmetsch's answers. He did indeed answer, I think, some of our questions. However, I have no idea whether our house across Grandview Street is within 500 feet of the blast site, and I'm not quite sure how to measure that, but I will try. Or perhaps Shires can draw us a map with a circle, a radius of the 500 feet of the blast site. One of the reasons we're re-asking in a way some of these questions is because the previous answers were written in language that other contractors would understand. However, we're not contractors. And so that's why we're asking for more specific answers. NFPA 495 must mean something to some people, but it doesn't to me. And it is my house that I'm worried about. So I would ask that we be shown what 500 feet around the blast site is. And as far as repairs done to houses, I would say that somebody skilled in working in older houses be employed. The people if this project happens, the people building these new apartments are skilled in new construction, which, for those people who live in old houses know, is not the same as working on older houses. Plaster in our houses is not sheetrock in new houses. So it's that kind of specificity that we're asking for. Thank you.
And combining 3 and 4, or excuse me, number 2 would be, would you clarify where the 3-unit building is that MSK has proposed, Jean?
I believe he answered one of the questions, but I just have a couple questions. Is the proposed 3-unit building the Hawks House? I believe he said it was. And what will be done with this house? Will it be renovated and rented as part of Shires housing? And lastly, we're wondering how this house on a separate lot can be part of the Monument View application.
Excuse me, may I just provide an answer to that at this point?
That seems easy. That's an easy one. Maybe it makes sense to have that answered now.
Yeah.
If there are simple answers, we'd be happy to answer.
You want to answer it now?
Yeah. Shires and Housing Vermont are not proposing any involvement with the existing Hawks House. The original permit, which was issued to the parcel for the entire PRD, identified the Hawks House as a 3-unit building.
I guess I just don't understand on this form here that they just resubmitted back on August 21st. It still lists 1 3-unit. So should it not be on there?
That's what he said.
Those are numbers for the entire project, right?
Those include numbers, including that includes the total planned residential development, which includes both Hawks House as well as the existing duplexes.
So Shires will not own it
No,
at all?
no.
Okay, thank you.
Number 3 and 4 will be combined. How much excavating will be required to build the proposed housing? And will grounding be leveled? And Dave Frederickson? Dave Frederickson, you're up on for 3 and 4.
I'm sorry, I didn't know I had 3 and 4. Okay.
All these questions, I can't hear you. All these questions.
How much excavating will be required? I think the duplexes are right on the ledge, so I would think there would be some blasting there. And on the leveling, number 4, Okay, that one I'm ready for. If I could go to the map, my question is, could you please explain how filling in the stormwater retention area and creating a subsurface stormwater retention facility will handle runoff? It appears that the water is funneled into a runoff that will cause Grandview and Silver Street neighbors a problem. With all the blacktops and buildings, rain could be a problem. If I could demonstrate on your C2 map, if you fill in this area here, it looks like water would run to this new berm, and then it would run and be funneled down to Grandview. Plus you have all of the blacktop and all of the roofs up there. So I think that's a concern. Thank you, Mary.
And number 5, will someone trained in blasting and/or hammering in a historic neighborhood be on hand if there is blasting or hammering? Judith?
I think we kind of touched on this earlier. I'm not exactly sure why it hasn't really been articulated that there is a distinction in terms of blasting. And we keep hearing that we have someone that has 5 years of experience with residential, and my understanding is that doesn't even come close to being qualified to managing the older historic homes, which are the closest to the largest unit, which is going to have probably the most amount of blasting within yards.
You can stay, Judith.
Oh, I can stay.
Yes.
Oh, no, that's
And
Fronia.
number 7.
Fronia students, okay. Fronia students.
Okay. Will you do pre-blasting and/or hammering video recording of neighboring houses to help determine damage? From you?
This has been discussed before, and I apologize, but I am concerned about this 500-foot radius, and therefore I live at 120 Grandview Street, across the street from Judith's house. And I would also like to say that as I walk around my house now, there are cracks in the walls. It's an old house, it settles, there are cracks. So it would be, I think, in everyone's interest, including Shires and Housing Vermont, to record the existing cracks should any further cracks appear. Thank you.
Number 7, will you measure radon levels in neighboring homes, pre and post blasting or hammering? Judith Fellows Miller.
Hey, I think what I'm going to do is combine 7 and 9. Will you measure the radon levels? We've already been told that they're not going to do that. It's difficult to imagine establishing whether the radon was caused by the blasting if there's no pre-blasting radon levels established. But I think what I'm going to do is hand out a letter that I've written for you, and then I'll read just the first part. Thanks. So essentially this will be shorter in the long run. The letter that I wrote to you is dated October 21st, and it has a request for 2 actions, and I'll only reference the first one because it's directly related to the question that we're entertaining. I asked for there to be a reference to the land use and development regulations on page 130. It's Article 8, subdivision standards, protection of natural and fragile features, Section 3A, suitability of land for subdivision. This is a quote, "All land to be subdivided shall, in the judgment of the Developmental Review Board, be of such a character that it can be used for intended purposes as stated in the application," and this part's important, "without danger to public health or safety, the environment, neighboring properties, the character of the area or district in which it is located. Radon is a cancer-causing radioactive gas. Radon release from blasting or hammering may occur beyond the immediate post-blasting period. There is no way of predicting the release, timeline, or pattern of radon. Radon remedies for old or historic homes will be costly and require ongoing monitoring and maintenance. The effectiveness of the monitoring system is never a guarantee and involves numerous obstacles to achieve and maintain effectiveness. According to the responses provided to the citizens group questions, Shires Housing and MSK minimize the hazards of radon at 426 South Street. They reject the responsibility attached to the health and management consequences of radon release. There is still no contact information provided, only job titles, no specific steps to identify the organization responsible for potential problems or damages. How will the possible future radon levels be monitored, managed, and mitigated by the Shires Housing Vermont project? Pre- and post-radon levels will need to be documented by homeowners. How will that process be managed? Will homeowners be given time to perform a radon pre-test? I have a letter and an example of a radon test. And in the letter from the state, this is a free test. This is the easy part. That's the least expensive part. It recommends 3 months to a year of testing your home, specifically during the winter months when the home is closed up and tight. Who will manage the process and provide objective facilitation? As indicated, there are more questions raised than answers received. A Citizen's Guide to Radon is published by the Environmental Protection Agency, and it states the following. Your chances of getting lung cancer from radon depends mostly on how much radon is in your home, the amount of time you spend in your home, whether you are a smoker or have ever smoked. According to statewide data, Bennington has a significantly higher percentage of smokers than the rest of Vermont. Vermont has a very high percentage of elderly residents. Radon is an environmental risk for all of us. But smokers, past smokers, and the elderly would be at a greater risk of radon poisoning.
Number 10 and 11, will trees that are on the site remain? And number 11, how mature will new trees be when planted? Will they be shade trees or merely ornamental? Dave Robertson.
Thank you, Mary. Number 10, I'd like to request that the trees that the Act 250 permit saved be put on the site plan so that none of them would disappear by mistake. Not accusing this group of any of that, but with Apple Ridge, there was quite a battle over those trees, and those trees were a big plus to the neighbors. If you look, you've got trees that are here, you've got trees that are here that provide a great deal of shade and are very important to the neighbors. And then you've got the trees over here, which of interest, I don't think you can take down anyhow. Well, not that you could, but those trees effectively block the monument view. I think the only monument view would be duplex number 1. Not that that's a big deal, but number 11 isn't a 2.5 caliper shade tree. I think it's just about that big. It's basically the same size as the scrub trees you're taking out, but I don't know if Shires knows, but Jack Appleman, when they did the project, they stripped off all the topsoil, put it in a big pile, and then removed it to another project of theirs. To me, this would make tree planting a bit of a problem. Also, when you're planting those trees on the ledges, I would think you'd almost have to blast to create enough space for the root balls of the trees. I've already talked about that 2 to 3 foot berm over there, and maybe it would cause runoff problems. But on the berm, there are 10 to 12 foot high evergreens. My question is, if you have a 10-foot high evergreen, how does that mitigate the problems that Fletcher and Swenson, Miller, excuse me, their complaint was the balconies are going to be looking into their houses. I don't know if a 10-foot tree is going to mitigate that problem. Thank you.
Dave,
And I'll be
you're going to
back.
Stay right here.
Yes.
Number 12, the parking lot has limited space. Where will snow be plowed in the winter?
I was concerned about that one, but I don't do plowing. So I went to Mount Anthony and asked the man that does the plowing, because it's a kind of a similar setup as here. And he looked it over and said he has some concerns. The first concern is the density. He doesn't know how you can plow from here all the way to there. He thought it would be all right, you know, on a 3-inch or less snowstorm, but on a big snowstorm, he doesn't know where the snow is going to go. Also, the snow storage is kind of interesting. You're storing snow here and burying 2 of the trees you're putting in, and the other snow storage is right up there, also burying another tree that you put in. The plowman at Mount Anthony thought that the snow piles would be extremely high, and he wondered, or I wondered, when that pile melts, again, it goes to Grandview, I believe. So that was the snow concerns I had. Am I gone?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry. Number 13, what criteria were used to determine that more cars would not result in more traffic? Dean McKenna?
This doesn't really, it's under the street, but during his presentation before, they mentioned that Silver Street is an average width street. And Dave and I did a little field trip, and we went out and measured streets. We have no life. So Silver Street, as they mentioned, was, 317, which I think is Dave's, is 21.3, and nothing except at Croft's house hit 22 feet even. In front of my house is 21 feet. That's street up. East side at Prospect is 25. Lower Grandview is 30 feet wide. Hillside near Friendly's is 37.5. Hillside near Silver is 30.5. Union near Valentine is 33. Upper Union, I think that's lower. Lower Union, the wide part is 38 feet. Jefferson near Elm is 29.8. I won't read them all, but I will turn it in. You do get the gist, though, that Silver Street is not as wide as many of these other streets are. There are parking restrictions on the street already. You can't park from 8 till 4, I think it is. So, that tells you already it is a narrow street. And when they're talking about the number of trips people are taking, if anyone has kids, and I don't know if a trip is down and up or just down, I can go up and down 5 times a day between soccer and everything else. So if these people have kids, they're going to be in and out more than 31 times in the afternoon. Thank you.
14 and 15 we will skip over. Number 16, what are your solutions, including cost estimates, to mitigate traffic and safety issues that might arise from other development? Dan Amidon?
So what we're talking about is the crosswalk that's being proposed, as well as the exit. Right on the Silver Street side. I see why you would want to keep the kids safe by building a crosswalk, but you're missing the point that the crosswalk and the proposed exit on the Silver Street side are at the crest of a hill at the steepest point, and if the cars stop for the children, or they stop because of the cars exiting the development, during snowstorms, when the roads are slick, they'll not be able to have enough traction to reach the top, and they'll have to park or back down the hill. this will create a dangerous situation. So I don't see where Shires gets off saying that there will be no measurable impact on safety. I think that we should be, proactive rather than reactive in this situation. If you've lived on this street, it's really clear that you got to get a running start to get up the street. There was a movement a few years ago where they were going to try to put a stop sign on Grandview Street, and it was, blocked by the people that were in the upper part of Silver Street because of concerns being able to get up the hill. So I think that this is a real and a credible threat for safety, and that it needs to be addressed.
And number 17 is directed at the board, DRB board. How will you remedy additional vehicular and pedestrian traffic should it become more problematic than anticipated and unsafe for local residents? And we would respectfully ask that at the next meeting, you would be able to come back with a thoughtful.
Mary, we can't do that. The board will have to make their decision in deliberative session, and then there'll be a written decision issued. So the board won't be responding in public hearing to that type of thing. That's not how the process works. It's like a judge issuing a written decision. They act as a judge. So we will take this question into deliberative session, and they may actually craft a condition if it's necessary. But the board won't respond to those types of issues in open session.
And number 18, with the recent issue of adding pre-kindergarten students to an already overcrowded elementary school, what is the plan for housing the additional pre-K students? Jean? Kenna?
Since the DRB, I want to jump back to 17, since they're not going to, may not be answering this, the crosswalk, if there's issues, is not going to help me or anybody else who has no sidewalks. These kids are going to cross the street, let's say they're going to go to Mag's Market, they're still going to have to walk in the street with the extra cars coming. So a crosswalk, to me, does absolutely nothing. Any of us walking our dogs does nothing. And then moving on to the schools, I would ask the board go back to the superintendent and have him clarify that when he made his statement that the kids could be absorbed, that he knew about and had in mind the pre-K students.
Number 19, will the existing fence be extended and maintained? Dave Frederickson?
First, a fence question for Nathaniel Court. On the site plan, you can't see if Nathaniel Court gets the fence they asked for. Also, on fences, I was kind of curious why it looks like there's a fence around almost all of the project except in back of Frederickson and Cross. So you've got fence, open, fence, and we don't know what Nathaniel Court has, but I was kind of curious why it wouldn't be a fence. You know, if that project ever went through, you've got the apartment buildings there, a lot of kids wandering off. And it also said they would maintain the fence, and again, we just, Apple Ridge said they'd maintain the fence too, and it's held up by 2x4s right now, so I was just a little skeptical on fence maintenance. Thank you.
Dave, could I just clarify for the board, are you requesting that a fence be placed in that location behind your property?
Yes, I would like one.
I just wanted to make sure that that was clear.
And 21, in regards to the green space concerns, Alicia Romack?
I consider the response from the developers to be inadequate in addressing the question. Basically, there really isn't any green space, and so they can't make any more green space on the property. Oh, am I being too quiet?
I can't hear anything.
It's the other microphone.
This one?
Yes, that one.
All right. So I think that the questions of adequate green space was not answered. The idea that children can play on 10 by 10 cement patios or small balconies on large buildings or in a water catchment area behind 2 tall buildings, which will cast dark shadows in a swale, basically, is really not considering the best interest of future families that might be living here. And for a project that's supposed to fit into the neighborhood, where the average size lot is over 1/3 of an acre, the 10 by 10 cement patios and 5 to 7 feet around the patios between the parked cars does not seem to be very holistic or healthful.
Did you want to respond to that as well?
It says that this is typical for downtown areas, but this isn't the downtown areas. There's all kind of green space in all of the neighborhoods all around there, but as Alicia said, you're just looking at balconies, et cetera. We've got the obesity problem. Playgrounds are a long distance away, so the lack of green space is a concern.
Becky Amos will now present the additional questions the committee has, and we would respectfully ask that those would be thoughtfully considered and explained at the next meeting.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to address you again. I will just run through the list of questions that I will then hand to you. Who specifically is responsible for arranging for and paying for damage to surrounding houses caused by blasting should such damage occur? What is the radius of the blasting survey? What houses are covered by this? Will a person experienced in blasting or excavating in a neighborhood of historic houses be hired? Will Shire's Housing, as requested before, provide a bond of $1 million per house to cover any damage that construction causes? What will be done with the house? We're talking about Hawks House. Will it be renovated? I think that question was already answered. How can this, how will you prevent a runoff of a heavy rainstorm from running downhill into neighbors' basements? Please explain the storm water retention system. Are the bioretention areas and subsurface storm water retention facility designed to be large enough to handle rainwater and snow melt? Please explain what is meant by the contract and state regulations that apply to blasting. How can it be determined if the radon levels have changed if pre-blast testing is not done? As a good faith gesture, which was in one of the responses from Shires, shouldn't Shires test surrounding homes? Who would pay for the required ventilation should it be deemed necessary? Truckloads of topsoil were removed from this site by the previous contractor. Given the shallow topsoil on top of the ledge, how will trees grow? Also on the ledge areas, will you have to blast to create space for the root ball of the trees? Won't the 2 to 3 foot proposed berm cause water runoff problems? If the apartment house is 32 feet high, how will 10 to 12 foot trees act as a screen, especially with balconies on the second story? How will snow be removed from the site as the space indicated for snow piles is not adequate for the size of the proposed development? Who is granting easement and by what kind of legal document? The most recent plan does not indicate a fence running north-south along the end of the Frederickson's yard. Will a fence be added there? That has already been answered, or it's been asked. Will outdoor lights in the proposed development be on all night, or will they be turned off at a designated time? If so, what time? The areas you have designated as green space for children to play will be impacted by snow or icicles falling from the roofs of the proposed buildings. Doesn't this create a potentially dangerous situation? Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, I have one more. We have a list of questions that we were going to ask the DRB. I guess that we're asking you to consider these things when you are thinking about this project. Number one, what are your solutions, including cost estimates, to mitigate traffic and safety issues that might arise from the proposed development? How will you remedy increased car, truck, and foot traffic should it become more problematic than anticipated and unsafe for local residents? With the recent issue of adding pre-kindergarten students to our already overcrowded elementary schools, what is the plan for housing the additional pre-K students? Will the board make the decisions binding so the neighborhood is protected? The structure with the most people has the longest drive to exit the property. Piece of land called Nature Trail that has been widened. Are there plans to make that an access road? What is the sewer capacity in this area? Can our older infrastructure handle the proposed development? Does adding this limit future growth? Thank you.
Will you be giving us a copy of those questions?
Yes.
Okay.
And please ignore the ones that were already answered about the Hawks House.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to this? Is he coming up?
Well, the next group of folks we'd want to listen to or hear from are the abutters, and if there are none, then we'd move on to anybody who would like to speak this evening.
Have you signed in?
Yes, I have. My name is Fred Kennedy. I live in Unit 39 of Applegate. I've got a couple of questions. Number one, are these safe?
No,
No, they're real trees?
they are, those are planned.
Proposed trees.
Sorry, those are proposed. Yeah, sorry.
Those are proposed trees. They're going to put those trees
They're
in.
proposed.
Yes.
What screening have you done for us? And to answer Dave's question, I live in this one. To answer Dave's question, anytime it snows, it's got to be removed because there's no room. Where did you put our dumpster?
So the dumpster is located on the plan?
Okay, where's their dumpster?
You want to show him?
You got both of them in the same place? That's great. Where do I put my garbage today? Do I put it in theirs or hers?
Okay.
Would you like me to answer that? The original permit that was granted to Apple Ridge Development LLC did not include a permitted dumpster location. So one has not been provided on this plan. There are, because the original permit allowed for totes to be used for those dwellings. So the current dumpster location is not a permitted dumpster facility.
When you come up there, do you realize that maintenance on the road and plowing is going to be a shared deal?
You have
Or is that something
to,
you don't
you have
know?
to address the board, not them. You come up to the microphone and address the board.
Do they realize before they come that this road is owned by us right now?
You want to talk about the easement, Jason?
Matt, do you want to address the maintenance questions?
Sure.
Maintenance easement questions?
We're going to, that microphone does not help with the folks in the audience, so perhaps you could project. If they have difficulty hearing, you might have to go up to the.
Sure. As we answered in the questions, an easement would be granted when the property is subdivided, and the easement would be legal grant of easement and rights-of-way that would allow for pedestrian, vehicular traffic, utilities, maintenance, and so forth. And, we're happy to work with, hopefully our future neighbors with working out locations of dumpsters and screening and
But we're not,
and plowing and,
Insurance?
So, and that's in process. We have we would have a management agreement with the condo association as we move forward to deal with kind of these nuts and bolts, type issues about property maintenance, so.
the only thing I feel about that's the federal government having 12 residents, and where do we stand because they're bigger than what we are?
I think that a point of clarification that folks need to perhaps understand is this whole property is under a current permit, and that permit includes easements over the entire property right now, and that will not change whether or not this permit is issued, just so everyone understands. Now, there may be issues that need to be worked out between the two entities, but as of right now, there are cross easements over that entire property for access and pedestrian access, vehicular access, utility access, and that is a condition in the existing two permits. That's how it stands today, whether or not anything happens with this permit.
What happens on an insurance thing on the road? Is that shared too?
Again, that issue's not addressed. I'm just talking about the easements. And we understand your concern. It's just I wanted to make sure that everyone understood that there are existing cross easements over the entire property that will not be extinguished whether or not this permit is issued.
Thank you.
Yes.
We got Loan coming in.
Well, he was first.
Is he signed in?
Which second now?
Bill Holmes. My question is, what kind of heat are they going to have for these units? That has not been talked about in the last two meetings at all. Being a closed system like they're talking about and all high energy efficient, where is the fresh air going to come for the system that's heating the place? Has that been addressed at all as far as how many square cubic feet that they have in the units versus the BTUs required to heat the units?
That's nothing the board can address.
It's part of the proposal of the buildings they're putting up.
Not as far as the building's concerned.
What we can address is issues regarding outdoor storage tanks, that sort of thing, but as far as the actual heating system, it will have to meet building codes, but it's not something this particular board will look at with regard to that.
Let me just clarify, as requested, the actual, fuel that these particular facilities will be using has not been chosen at this point in the process, but as requested, if propane, exterior propane facilities are used and stored on site, we have identified locations for each one of those places.
Are they going to be above ground or below ground?
Those would be below ground.
Shoot.
We can just...
Who addresses, as far as the makeup air, the fresh air for the boiler systems, to make sure that these high-efficiency units are capable of having the right
That all is dealt
for the BTU systems?
That's all dealt with by the building code, the state and town building codes, and the folks that install these have to be licensed by the state of Vermont.
I'm not worried about the licensing as much as the buildings and the right BTUs for the buildings.
Again, that's all going to be dealt with by the building code, not by the land use and development regulations, which this board administers.
No, excuse me. This man was here was next. Do you want to speak? He was.
But she's in a butter. She's in a butter.
Rose Wolf, Nathaniel Court. I just have a simple, again, fencing. I just want to make sure that we're closed off between Eden Way. It's not on the map there. We're down below. Down. Right here, down here. I just want to make sure that you closed up the fence between Eden Way and Silver Street. You were over here, and said Silver Street was closed, but at the end of the right there.
That's not even part of the program, is it?
Sketched it out on the map the last time.
I don't know.
That's
Hold on.
Yeah, I don't know. The line.
May I, can I ask just a point of clarification?
Yes.
I may have misunderstood at the last meeting where the request was. The Nathaniel Court residents are requesting for additional fencing between building, I don't exactly know which building, but
Well, see, I had pictures, and I said, I can give you the pictures. She said, oh, I know what I'm doing. And it turns out you don't. I gave them to
Excuse
the
me,
board.
I haven't finished addressing the board, thank you. As I said before, I may have misunderstood. I guess my request is that additional, is there additional fencing being requested along essentially the portion of lands that's neighboring to what we call the Hawks House and then the duplex adjacent to that?
Oh, I don't have it with me. I gave it to the board, Liz.
My understanding, maybe I misunderstood 2 weeks ago, is that there is a gap in the fence here, and it's hard to tell on this screenshot here, but we have changed the site plan to denote existing fence and proposed fence. So we saw that there was a gap here, so we've added fence there, and then actually we put in we're proposing a small, 4-foot, picket fence here to separate it from, from these kind of, I think what you're talking about is down here, and that would be the condo association, and not our property line, if it were to go through.
It goes, great.
So, hold on. So I guess my question is, are we being requested as opposed to as a part of the PRD to include the entire southern boundary of installed fencing along the lands of Nathaniel Court?
See, well, Eden Way, their fencing ends here. And then you guys, this is your property.
But
behind here, you're gonna be on that property. Here is Silver Street. Here's the Silver Street fence. And then it
that
ends.
ends right here.
Right.
Which is right at this location. And then it's picked up again, like you said, right over near the corner of the property in this location here. And that's what we've proposed, is to add that additional fence. That's correct. Yep. And actually, that's land of Madison. There's buildings in front here, but there's the trees in the section behind. That's correct. Yep, that's what's been proposed.
Does that clarify?
Okay. I think we were right, I guess, in understanding.
Thank you.
You're next. Finally, yes.
I don't want to jump ahead of anybody. I'm not in any of the aforementioned groups. I'm not paid by the developer. I guess I fit the category anybody else. My name is Don Miller, and I'm anybody else. Since the last meeting, I did some more reading on the regulations, and that's what I'm sharing here. I think you have a copy. So let me go through those. Number one, has already been spoken to, so I'll just mention it, that I agree with the previous speakers. This is the one that is in regard to protection of natural and fragile features, and talks about the subdivision shall be, excuse me, without danger to the public health or safety, and on and on. And one additional point I think I would make is that it's not just those aforementioned groups that should be concerned about radon. The tenants who would be living here if this is approved, and their children, would also be exposed to the radon. So that's, I think, a significant point. If we're concerned about the people that might live here, we should be concerned about the radon. Two, the second part, and my assumption here is, reading all this, that this proposal involves both the planned what they call PRDs, planned residential developments, and the subdivision standards, both. And so I draw in paragraph number 2, under the PDR standards at section 9.3E, dealing with urban growth center standards, it says, PRDs located within the urban core shall be designed in the following manner. Buildings front upon and are oriented toward roads or common areas. And paragraph 3, adequate provision for open space and common areas shall be included in the design of the PRD, which should serve as a central organizing feature within the PRD, such as a green or park. Very similar language in the subdivision standards at section 8.5A. Those standards require, quote, subdivisions shall include adequate provisions for open space and common areas which would serve as a central organizing feature within the subdivision, such as a green or park. So the obvious question I've had trouble identifying is, where is the open space or common area that serves as a central organizing feature of this project? I don't see it, but I'll leave that to you. That's your job to find it. And that sort of relates to the next paragraph, 3. The subdivision standards refer back to the zoning district standards. And at 8.2B, it says, lot size and layout shall conform to zoning district standards pertaining to frontage, lot, and yard requirements. Well, I believe that will refer you back to table 311, which describes, I believe, the standards for the MR district, which I think this is this. This is the mixed residential district. So talking about the buildings fronting, and I'm looking in particularly at the 8-unit apartment, and I can't figure out which is the front. Can somebody answer that? I mean, it's supposed to front upon and oriented toward roads or common area. That's not what I mean, the other building. It fronts where? That's the front?
Yeah.
Onto the parking lot, okay. So then, that's important because if the front was over this way toward the road or where you were driving in where you would see it first, then that would make, I would presume, the wall behind that, the rear, or the rear yard. And table 3.11 requires that be a 40-foot setback. It's only 20. But it's okay as a side yard because that's only required to be 15, I think. So it's important to figure out which is the front and which is the rear if we're going to follow table 3.11. Another requirement in there is that the building shall not be higher than 35 feet. And I think that's going to be okay, but I wonder if you don't go down into the ground, if you're going to build on top, does that elevate everything higher? I don't know where you measure or how you measure, but I think the 35-foot requirement needs to be addressed. And then another question, which is maybe more because it's getting late. I love the diagram because it shows a paved road coming in. And then it shows a parking lot on the other end, but I don't understand how the cars jump or get from one to the other. And should that be diagrammed in there? Should that be part of the subdivision request? Should there be a plan to get the cars from the street to the parking lot? Is that important?
Yeah, but it's all paved.
I don't know. It also, there's a line on there that talks about the dividing line between two sections. I think I recall somebody came in and they took the old layout and divided it into 3 sections a year or 2 ago. And so I think that, I don't know if that's what the line is, and I don't know if it has any significance, because I think currently the ownership is common. So I suppose before anybody did anything, they could change the line. It might take another hearing or another change, but it looks to me like where that road does not continue would be in violation of that line. Look at the map. I don't know if I read it right, but that may be why there's no way to get from the driveway or from the road to the parking lot. I don't know.
May I ask?
Yes, go ahead, Scott.
I suspect.
Can I just ask Don to point out where he's talking about jumping from one place to another?
Okay, this looks like a paved way. The color changes, that may not mean anything. And then there's a parking lot, paved. And I'm just wondering how the cars get there. I hope you don't plan on ever using this space, do you?
May I address this question?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so, the shaded areas that are proposed here represent what is to be new. Okay, and what is existing right now is this parking area here. You've got a portion of the drive that goes and stops right about in this section, which is essentially this section. And then there is an existing paved area here that goes into this area here, which includes the parking. We've got existing parking as well as a stacked parking unit. He's almost done, yeah. The shaded area proposed, which would be contiguous with the existing drive. The shaded area essentially are proposed changes to the paved area.
Thank you. I can almost see where it might be. When I went out there, I didn't see some of that. That's what I think it might be helpful if the board would go out and look. If there's paving there, I didn't see it. But it's kind of obvious, but that's where you would want it to go if it were going to be there.
I'm sorry, just paving, if I can just ask for clarification with respect that there is paving, there are paved areas from the existing Eden Way.
I think we all understand that.
You can see it. The other part of Eden Way is paved, yes, I recognize that. Then I just have a couple other things, and I'm not going to spend any more time on them, other than point on paragraph 4, there are a couple interesting sections, 8.6, that referred to expected tax revenue, and whether or not you all analyzed that as mentioned in section 8.6. And then under B, there's a reference, that's 8.6A still, to a fiscal impact analysis. No big deal. I was doing my reading, and I thought I'd call those sections to your attention. Thank you.
Would you like me to respond to any of those questions, or?
I think most of them have been answered already. I'd like to make this the last one because it's getting late and we want to do close deliberations. So after Vic is finished, we're going to close the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in a butter, 4 Eden Way, Vic Milani. And you gentlemen were presented with a petition of over 1,000 signatures of residents who were concerned of zoning violations that this particular project presents. And in talking to many of these people, I'd just like to emphasize 2 of the ones that were most often brought to my attention as they considered signing this petition. One being the 8-unit housing. I've heard repeatedly from Shires and Vermont Housing that the lack of green space isn't a problem because this is a downtown area. Several speakers tonight who are neighbors and abutters certainly pointed out this is not a downtown area. This is an area with residential housing, historical housing, with lots of green space. So to make a comparison and say that this is okay because this is what's appropriate in downtown housing, I think negates their point. Again, that's exactly the reason that we're challenging this, because this is not downtown housing. This is a condominium complex with
8-unit housing that is not in the character of the neighborhood. And that's the second point that many people brought up. Again, if we were looking at duplex units, again, I think there'd be less resistance. But when you propose an 8-unit housing complex that certainly is well out of the character of the neighborhood, certainly is not consistent with green space, and we challenge that to be a violation of zoning policy and regulations. So again, gentlemen, as you consider this proposal, as you consider this project, I know that you will consider those points. Again, I think the response that we received regarding radon is lacking. Again, we know that, and I can speak from experience here, because my particular unit has a mitigation system. Because when I purchased the unit, I was told that the radon levels were higher than normal in this particular area. Now, I don't know about the other units in the complex, but I know that my particular unit has a radon mitigation system that runs constantly. And again, the research indicates that any rock fracture, any blasting, is certainly going to release radon. Again, as was pointed out by previous speakers, how long after this project, how long after the blasting, nobody can answer that. So again, I feel that's another real issue for you gentlemen to consider, the safety issue. And the safety as far as residents and neighbors, and also people who might move into this particular complex. So again, gentlemen, I know you'll consider all those points. Thank you for listening, and again, have a good evening.
I'm sorry, I forgot one point on table 3.11, rear yards. On the duplexes, I believe the table requires 35 feet setback on rear. I may be reading that wrong, but check it. Those 5 units vary from 15 to 29. I think they're required to be 35. I may be wrong.
Okay,
I'd
like to close the hearing.
Can we ask some questions?
Yeah, the board should be able.
Yes, Jean?
At the beginning of the meeting, we had requested a site visit, and you said at the end of the meeting, I just wanted to remind you that we would still like that.
Yep, I'll make sure that the board acts on that before they close the hearing. I think that if where it stands now, if the board feels that they'd like to ask some questions, certainly they should. And if the applicant feels that they want to respond to anything that's brought up today, they should. If you folks think you need more time to respond to those questions, we would certainly entertain a request to do that. But if you feel that you've submitted the evidence necessary for the board to make a decision, you can certainly stand on that evidence, and we can move to deliberative session later this evening. But certainly it's up to the board to ask questions at this time.
Bill, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Jason, can you describe the stormwater retention system that you're building?
Yes. Firstly,
Jason?
yeah, go to the board. Firstly, this project, as it's proposed, will be required to seek coverage under the stormwater management or operational stormwater permit requirements. Those criteria are water quality, channel protection, and what's called overbank protection as well. The first requirement is essentially a protection for removal of pollutants. It covers, essentially is meant to remove any runoff, remove some level of pollutants from runoff. The sort of the maroonish shaded areas, we've proposed what's called a biofilter. It's essentially a modified SAM filter. Runoff from the parking lot areas as well as from the portions that go towards Silver Street will drain to these areas, will be directed to these areas, will either by surface runoff or by pipe, and will discharge to these locations, at which point they will filter through a media that's a mixture of sand and compost, and will also have plant material above them that are capable of taking wet and dry environments. Those areas will be under drained, they collect, and they will discharge to what is now still, what is the dry pond for Apple Ridge. The stormwater detention area facility that we're proposing is going to be essentially a 3/4 to 1 1/4 inch crushed stone, which we know and will require by the specifications to have a minimum porosity of 0.4, so it'll have a 40% porosity, meaning that it's partially rock and partially air. So the porosity is essentially the void ratio for this facility will be 0.4. That is essentially the storage that's going to be provided. And at a minimum, this whole facility has been designed in a manner that, including the drainage that drains from the current Apple Ridge portion that's been constructed, all of that will still drain to this northeastern facility and will not exceed whose discharge, which is by a pipe system down to Grandview Street and then collects via the storm drain system. This entire facility will discharge to the municipal storm system and will not increase flows for the 10-year storm, which is a 4-inch rainfall. In addition, the channel protection storm is a 2.3-inch rainfall, and we're required to provide a different level of quantity treatment for that, which essentially is you spread the discharge and you slow the discharge way down from even pre to post. So this facility will sort of drain into itself in that area, will be dealt with underground, and will discharge to a municipal stormwater system.
Ron?
Yeah, Jason?
Yes.
Please, what are the square footage of the existing condos in there, do you know, roughly?
I'm sorry?
What is the square footage of the existing condos?
The square footage, like the building coverage?
Yeah, itself, of the building, yeah.
So you mean the building coverage of...
The square footage of the building?
Of each building?
Yeah, no, just roughly what are they, as compared to the six?
Sorry, so you're saying okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I don't actually know that number offhand. I'd have to look at it.
Just curious as to the relationship between the square footage of the existing condos and the 6 and the 8 unit buildings. Roughly how many more square feet are they going to be?
So you're asking, if I may, you're asking whether we're increasing building coverage?
No, not building coverage, just the square footage of the building.
You're just trying to get a size relationship?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You tell them that the plan is to scale.
Yeah, the plan is to scale.
Can you tell me that?
You've got 11 by 17s, I think, and we have one hard copy that was submitted to you. So I would actually have to just look at it so I don't make an error in statement.
Okay, but the height of the existing ones, what's maximum height of the existing
Those are
ones?
2-story, and they've got, the actual height, the height varies because some of them are 2-story, some of them are 1-story.
How many feet is that?
That's another good question. I don't have that data on that right now.
So
you probably got 8 feet, and then you've got, your eaves.
I know roughly what it is.
Go to the midpoint.
For the record, I'd like to know how they are as compared to the height of the 6 and the 8 foot.
Well, that information we can certainly get and provide to you.
We have that information as well.
We know that. Okay,
available.
thanks.
Yeah.
Good deal.
I apologize, I don't have them right offhand.
Okay, thank you.
Charles?
How are you going to deal with outside storage on the apartments there?
Exterior storage on the apartments?
Yeah. What's your rules and regulations for that?
Matt, could you actually stand up and just talk about that a little bit?
You're talking bicycles, kayaks?
Yeah, kayaks, canoes, bicycles. Are they going to be just out in front of the apartments, or are there rules regulating where they can put it?
It'd be good for John to be here to answer some of the rules that they have specifically about that. But I do know, just in speaking with John and hearing him, respond to that question, that they're fairly vigilant about maintaining the front porches and the stuff, that accumulates in and around the yards. I'd encourage anyone to go down, Roaring Branch and take a look at the buildings we built there, which are duplexes. Very similar to what we're proposing here. What we have done for storage is design a fairly large interior storage space. No, you couldn't fit a kayak in there, but for winter, you know, you can put things in there and store, you know, whatever you need to store. And on the larger buildings, there are going to be rules about what you can have on the balcony and what you can't have.
I might be able to help with that. I work for Shires Housing. I'm in property management.
Great.
Okay, we'll get you to sign in.
You have to sign in, come up.
Thank you.
I have another question. Okay. Can we answer all these people? Oh, I'd love to, can I? Text me.
Hi, I'm Diane Nomowitz. I'm in property management with Shires Housing, and our current lease does not allow any outdoor storage of any belongings whatsoever. In some of our properties, we do have bike racks where bikes are stored. I doubt that we'll be having those here, as there's really no area for them, but any outdoor toys or anything like that is to be removed from the outdoors daily, once the children are done playing with that.
And Diane, if I may just qualify that, we have proposed bike rack
We have,
locations.
okay, so they're-
particularly
they're-
for the multi-unit buildings.
And they're required to keep their bikes locked up on those racks at all time, and we do monitor that.
Thank you. Bill?
Jason, what's your time frame on this project? Starting this fall, next spring?
I can answer it. Okay. We're not going to be starting this fall. I think we're looking at a possible spring construction start.
And how long do you anticipate?
I think construction is probably going to take about 12 months. We have not put this out to bid. We don't have a construction, this is not a CM, a construction manager project. But you know, based on my experience with similar sized projects, about 12 months is what I would expect.
So there was some concern about being able to have time to test for radon. There would be time to test for radon
In the...
before construction commences?
The neighboring homes?
Yes.
Yes, yes. There are radon test kits that can measure, you know, within a few weeks. There's different recommendations of it, obviously, but
No.
We're not starting this fall.
Okay.
There will be time, yes.
I see you got places vacant over on the Roaring Branch. What happens if you can't rent these out? Are you going to change your standards for going in there?
No, there are no proposed,
Are you gonna
once
stop
the permit application is complete, then this
Are you going to stop construction, or are you going to go, if you can't rent the ones you already have out there, are you going to stop construction?
No. No, again, not having this out to bid and have a contractor, a general contractor, or have a construction manager that we're working with, based on my experience, I think that we could probably complete this and lease it up when it's entirely completed. But I don't know exactly, and I'm not going to promise that. There might be an opportunity to lease up a completed building, depending upon how they construct and you know, whether they go, you know, be large buildings first and work their way out, or start with the duplexes, move in. I can't answer that right now.
So the short, if I may just clarify the answer to that question, the lease up, the time in lease up for these buildings is not contingent on its construction schedule. Once the project, and correct me if I'm wrong, once the project's fully funded, construction begins and it's completed. There is an expectation that lease up will take a certain amount of time And sometimes those expectations are exceeded, and I believe it was in the case with Roaring Branch that those expectations were exceeded, meaning that they filled up faster than they expected. Vacancies are expected, but that once the project is permitted and funded, and completely finally designed with construction documents, it'll go out to bid, it will follow a construction schedule, and then it will be complete.
I think I'm going to close the meeting at this time.
Before we close the hearing, there was a request on whether the board felt they needed to make a site visit. So if anybody felt that on the board felt that they needed that, we would have to schedule that. If the board does not feel that's necessary, then we can certainly move on to other business.
Can't we discuss that in a deliberative session?
Yeah, can we, yeah.
Well, we can discuss that in a deliberative session if you have determined that this will go into another hearing. And the other problem with that is if we do that, then we won't be able to schedule the site visit until after the next hearing. So if you folks want a site visit, I would recommend that you make that determination now. This is, all I will say is this project's been before us many, many times.
Most of us have seen that on our own, obviously.
I guess, does anyone feel that they need to do a site visit to understand the site?
I have. A couple of times.
I've been there.
I'd like a motion to close the hearing. Bill moves to close it. Charles, you got a second?
Yeah.
Charles seconds it. All in favor? We're going to go into a deliberative session, and one of three things will happen this evening. We'll either continue it if we have more questions, we will pass it, or we will deny it. That will be determined this evening, which we're going to go.
With regard to continuance, denial, passing, but also passing or approving with conditions. So, there are some subtleties around that. Please make sure, if you have not already, and you would like a copy of either the decision or a recess memo to continuing it to another date, please make sure that you've signed in and give me an accurate address. We've had a bunch of them come back to us, so I'd ask you to please make sure that you give us an address where you receive mail.
Glenn, I'd like to speak to you before you leave.
Can you just let us know the next process, if it's approved or denied?
Sure, let's go through that. If it is continued, it is very likely that the next meeting would be November 18th. November 4th is our next meeting, but that's Election Day. So if it is continued, it will be to November 18th. If the board decides that they have adequate information to make a decision, either this evening or in the near future, what will happen is the board will do a written decision, and that written decision will be distributed to everyone who signed up either at this meeting or the previous meeting. That decision will go out once that decision is issued. There is a 30-day appeal period for either party that is unhappy with it, and perhaps sometimes both parties are unhappy with it, and both of them could appeal it. And the appeal process is to the environmental court. And they have I believe they've just moved to Burlington. We can certainly supply you with the information of the court clerk if you folks would like, if anyone is interested in that. But beyond that, it does go outside of our purview. It goes to the environmental court. The environmental court, if it is appealed, will hear this project, this application completely anew. It is as if this hearing did not take place. In other words, you folks, either party, would have to completely redo their case unless there was a very narrow appeal regarding a condition or something like that, or procedure. But if there is an appeal of the decision, it would have to be done anew, just so folks understand that. That's why when there were concerns about the minutes and all those sorts of things, all that becomes irrelevant once there's an appeal, and the environmental court takes it from there. And the board has no role to play in that. Any other questions on procedure from folks? Okay.
Thank you.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.